She threw me out because I was broke. 3 days later, I bought the house and threw her out. You ever been down so bad that even the walls of your own house start looking at you funny? Yeah, that was me, Austin. Sitting on the same couch where my wife's other man had been just hours before, staring at the divorce papers she slapped onto the table like she was handing me a receipt. Kyler stood over me, arms crossed, smirking like she was doing me a favor. Honestly, Austin, you should have seen this coming. I can't be with a man who doesn't provide. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing. Like I wasn't the same guy who once took her on vacations, paid all the bills, and made sure she never had to worry about a thing. Like I wasn't the man she swore to love for better or worse, but apparently worse had a spending limit. I looked at her, at the life we built, and then at the man in the doorway. The one she didn't even bother to hide anymore. I was broke, humiliated, homeless, for now. If you've ever been underestimated, hit that like button. And if you're loving this drama already, subscribe because I've got more stories that'll have you screaming at your screen. 3 days later, the papers were signed, my bags were packed, and Kyler finally got what she wanted. Freedom. Too bad she didn't realize I was about to own the very house she kicked me out of. And when I handed her the eviction notice, oh, she wasn't so smug anymore. Austin and Kyler were the kind of couple you saw on Instagram and thought, that's goals. Picture this. Candlelit dinners at fancy spots, spontaneous weekend getaways, laughter echoing through the halls of their perfect apartment. Everything about them screamed couple goals. They even had that synchronized "we're so in love" look in every photo where their smiles looked like they were photoshopped into perfect alignment. In the beginning, life was sweet. Like, honey, I'm on top of the world sweet. Austin had a booming business in real estate. He wasn't just making money, he was making moves. Kyler didn't have to worry about a thing. She got to focus on her career, her Instagram, and her friends while Austin handled everything else. Rent paid. Bills covered. If Kyler wanted a new bag, a new car, or a spontaneous trip to Bali, it just happened. No questions asked. Their world was shiny and perfect, like the kind of love story you see in movies, but without the plot twist, until there was one. Then came the bombshell. Austin's big investment, the one he'd been hyping up for months, collapsed. The market tanked, his money vanished faster than you can say foreclosure, and everything he'd worked for crumbled. 1 minute, Austin was signing deals, looking at mansions, and planning their future. The next, he was staring at empty bank accounts and a mountain of unpaid bills. Kyler didn't even notice at first. She was busy with her shopping spree or catching up with friends at brunch. But eventually, the reality hit, and it hit hard. It didn't take long for the perfect to slip away. That dream they had of building something together? Gone. And for Austin, the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was watching Kyler lose respect for him. Kyler didn't just step up as the breadwinner. She acted like she was doing Austin a favor. At first, she tried to keep up the act of being supportive, but oh boy, the cracks started showing fast. The sweet Kyler? Gone. In her place was a woman who seemed to think she was carrying the world on her shoulders, all while Austin sat there watching everything fall apart. It started small, little jabs here and there. So, Mr. Stay-at-home, what's for dinner tonight? She'd say with a smirk as she tossed her purse on the counter like she was tossing her husband's dignity aside. She'd roll her eyes if Austin didn't have something productive to say. When he'd try to help out, she'd snap. Can't you see I'm the one holding this house together? Soon, it wasn't just sarcastic comments, it was full-blown disrespect. Kyler started coming home late from work, or whatever it was that kept her out, and when she did, she'd barely acknowledge Austin. It was like she was too busy for him, too important to be bothered with a man who couldn't even pay the rent anymore. But the real kicker? The phone calls. Kyler would be on the phone for hours, laughing like she was auditioning for a rom-com. She'd step into another room, and Austin would catch fragments of her conversations. Yeah, babe, I'll be over later, or you're too much, but I like it. He'd pretend he didn't hear, but something inside him twisted every time. And when Austin confronted her, trying to hold on to what little was left of their marriage, she turned it around. Maybe if you weren't broke, I wouldn't have to find happiness elsewhere, she'd say, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Austin would stand there, stunned, unable to respond because, well, what could he say? He wasn't the man she married anymore. He wasn't enough. And if that wasn't bad enough, the next punch hit harder than a sucker punch to the gut. Kyler, with her newfound power, would ask, "Do you even deserve this house anymore? Maybe it's time we move on." Austin was living in a house that wasn't even his anymore. He was sleeping next to a woman who had no problem making him feel small. And every time he tried to speak up to defend himself, she'd shut him down, always finding a way to twist the knife deeper. It was like watching a slow motion train wreck. He knew what was coming, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. Kyler's games went from subtle to outrageously bold, faster than Austin could process. She stopped pretending, stopped hiding it, and let the chaos unfold in front of him. It was like she was daring him to do something, anything, while she played her little revenge fantasy out. One night, Austin came home late after a long day of job hunting. Yes, still job hunting, because nobody wants to hire a guy with a failed business and a broken ego. He unlocked the door, expecting the usual silence, maybe some cold leftovers, a house that still felt like it had a heartbeat. But instead, he walked in to find a guy, his hoodie on, sprawled across his couch, feet up, like he owned the place. The dude didn't even blink when Austin walked in. Kyler, in the kitchen, didn't even flinch. She didn't even look up, just hummed to herself like this was a regular Tuesday. "Oh, hey, you're back. Didn't know you'd be home so soon." Austin stood there for what felt like an eternity. His jaw was locked, his stomach a ball of fire, but he couldn't get the words out. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. There was a guy in his house, wearing his clothes, and Kyler was acting like everything was normal. He should have said something. He should have yelled, kicked the guy out, maybe even thrown the guy's sneakers into the street. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because he couldn't see himself fighting for a relationship that felt long gone. Maybe he didn't even have the energy anymore. Either way, he just let it slide. That wasn't even the worst part. A few nights later, Kyler started bringing other men home, while Austin was still there. She'd walk in with a guy who was half her age, laughing like everything was normal. She'd kiss him at the door, walk him into the living room, and make herself comfortable, like as if Austin wasn't sitting right there. Sometimes she'd send Austin into the bedroom to give them some space. He'd sit there, humiliated, his pride slowly eroding, watching the life he thought he built with her fall apart in real time. But the worst part? He didn't do anything. He just took it. He let her do what she wanted, say what she wanted, while he sat in the background, a shadow of the man he used to be. His pride was shattered, but there was nothing to break. Imagine getting cheated on, and the dude is chilling in your house, eating your snacks. Nah, I'd cry. What would you do in this situation? It was the most humiliating thing Austin had ever gone through, but he stayed silent. He didn't leave because, honestly, where would he go? Where could he go when the world had turned its back on him? Kyler had hit a point where she no longer cared about hiding her true feelings. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. The house, once a symbol of their life together, had turned into a battlefield where Austin was the last to know the war was over. One night, she came home tipsy, the scent of cheap wine and arrogance wafting off her like a perfume. She had that look on her face, smug, as if she was about to deliver some grand revelation. Without even a hint of remorse, she tossed the envelope onto the kitchen table like it was just another piece of mail. "Here," she said with a grin, "you might want to read this. It's about time." Austin looked down at the divorce papers sitting there, the weight of them sinking in. It was happening. She was kicking him out, officially. His entire world was about to collapse into a piece of paper that could tear everything apart. She didn't even give him a chance to respond before she opened her mouth again. "Honestly, Austin, you should be thanking me. You're lucky I didn't leave sooner. I deserve better than this, better than you." And there it was. The last shred of any respect he had for her vanished in an instant. Kyler's words weren't even about the money anymore. She'd made it clear she thought she was better than him. She was done pretending to be the loving wife. Now she was just someone who wanted to win, and Austin, he was the casualty. For a moment, he just stared at the papers. He should have been angry, right? He should have thrown them in her face, yelled, "You think fine, go ahead." But no, he didn't move. He didn't argue. No tears, no pleading, not even a word. Instead, Austin took a deep breath, signed the papers with a calmness that would have shocked anyone who knew him before this mess. The pen scratched across the paper, and for a moment he felt nothing. Nothing but a quiet satisfaction that deep down he knew what was coming next. Kyler, still on her high horse, didn't even notice. She was too busy texting someone else, her life already moving on to the next chapter without even a second thought for the man she was leaving behind. "Good luck, Austin. You're gonna need it," she muttered, turning her back to him. Austin didn't even respond. He just smirked to himself, a slight, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. No one saw it, but in that moment, he knew something she didn't. He was about to come out on top. Because Austin wasn't just about to take her out of his life. He was about to flip the script in a way that would have Kyler regretting everything. 3 days later, Kyler was sitting in her brand new apartment, scrolling through her phone and trying to move on. She hadn't thought much about Austin since the divorce papers were signed. But then she got the notice. The house had been sold. She stared at the email, reading it over and over, her heart racing as she realized what it meant. Her house, the one she had kicked Austin out of, was no longer hers. A new owner had claimed it. What? She stormed into the house, fuming, her mind working overtime as she figured out who could have bought it. Who had the audacity to take her place in the home she thought was hers by right. And there, standing in the doorway, like the calm before a storm, was none other than Austin. Kyler's face went pale, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Austin stood there, leaning casually against the doorframe, looking completely unfazed as she stood there with her boxes, ready to leave the house she once called home. "What the hell is going on, Austin?" she demanded, her voice shaking with disbelief. Austin didn't even flinch. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. "This place? Yeah, it's mine now." Kyler froze. "What?" That's when the truth hit her. The business that had failed, it hadn't failed at all. In fact, it had finally paid off. Big time. All those projects Austin had poured his heart into, they'd come through. He wasn't just back on his feet, he was standing taller than ever. But he'd kept it quiet. He hadn't told anyone, especially not Kyler. She hadn't deserved to know, not after the way she'd treated him. Kyler couldn't find words. She opened and closed her mouth, trying to process what was happening. She looked at the boxes she had packed, her face flushing with the realization that she had just been played. She'd thought he was the one who lost everything. But now she was the one who had nothing. Austin stood there, cool as a cucumber. He could have said 1,000 things about how she had kicked him when he was down, about how she'd thrown him away like yesterday's trash. But he didn't. He didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. Then, with all the calmness in the world, Austin dropped the mic. "Looks like you don't have to worry about a broke man anymore, since you don't have one." Boom. Kyler stood outside with her boxes, speechless for the first time in her life. There was nothing left for her to say. She had done everything she could to push Austin down, to make him feel small, to discard him. But in the end, it was her who ended up with nothing. Austin, he walked back into the house, the new owner, the new king of his domain. With every step, his smirk deepened. He had won, not with anger or revenge, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Because you better believe that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting loud. It's letting the world see you rise. And Austin? He was rising higher than Kyler ever thought possible. Kyler tried one last time. She begged, pleaded even, hoping Austin would have a change of heart, maybe take her back. But there was nothing there anymore. Not the love, not the respect, not even the bitterness. Austin just watched her, calm and collected, as she fell apart. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was more powerful than any words could have been. Kyler had played herself, and now she was left holding the pieces. She left the house, walking away from everything she thought was hers. As she stepped out with her bags in hand, it hit her. She had underestimated Austin, and now she was the one who lost. Austin stood there, watching her leave with the faintest of smiles. He didn't gloat, didn't rub her face in it. He knew what he had been through and what he'd overcome. The lesson was simple. Never ever underestimate someone when they're down, because they might just come back owning everything. Austin wasn't a bitter man. He was humble, and though the victory was sweet, he knew it wasn't about revenge. It was about growth, perseverance, and proving to himself that he didn't need anyone to believe in him, just himself. If you love this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell me, what would you have done if you were in Austin's shoes? Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do, it's about who you become.